This film poses a haunting ethical question. What would a person do if they woke up 90 years too early on a spaceship drifting through the endless void? Would they choose to die alone, or steal someone else's life just to survive? A terrifying journey into deep space is about to begin. The colossal starship Avalon glides silently through the infinite darkness, bound for a distant colony called Homestead 2. Deep inside, 5,000 passengers and 258 crew members lie in suspended animation, completely unaware of the disaster ahead. As the ship passes through a dense meteor field, its massive shields collide with a rogue asteroid. The violent impact sends a shockwave tearing through the corridors. This triggers a critical power failure and a catastrophic system glitch. Suddenly, a single passenger pod activates decades too soon. Jim Preston jolts awake. He's greeted by a cheerful hologram, congratulating him on sleeping for 120 years and announcing that arrival is just 4 months away. Full of hope, Jim heads to his assigned cabin in the technician quarters, Class 38, settling in with a smile, eager to start his new life. But his excitement shatters when he walks into the main concourse. It is completely empty. He frantically searches the ship. There are no passengers, no crew, not even the captain is awake. Jim rushes to the observatory and the flight map reveals a horrifying truth. Homestead 2 is still light years away. He has only been asleep for 30 years. Realizing it is a massive glitch, he sends a desperate emergency signal back to Earth. But the harsh reality of space travel crushes him. The message will take 19 years to arrive, and a reply won't come for another 55. Wandering the desolate, silent corridors, Jim spots a glimmer of hope. A man polishing glasses in an elegant bar. He rushes over, desperate for human connection, only to realize the bartender is an android named Arthur. Jim grills the robot about his pod's malfunction, but Arthur has no answers for this living nightmare. Days bleed into weeks. Jim tries to sleep, wakes up, and eats breakfast in deafening silence. Hoping to save himself, he pores over complex technical manuals, studying how the hibernation pods work. He attempts to fix his own, but fails completely. He even tries to breach the sealed crew quarters to wake someone for help, but the reinforced doors are impenetrable. Defeated, Jim sinks into a crushing depression, resigning himself to growing old and dying entirely alone on the ship. Sensing his despair, Arthur advises him to stop worrying and start enjoying the billionaire luxury all around him. Taking the android's advice to heart, Jim hacks his way into the ship's most lavish suite. For months, he plays arcade games, watches movies, and feasts on gourmet food. But the luxury soon turns hollow. Driven mad by boredom, Jim puts on a spacesuit and steps out into the void, tethered to the massive ship. Surrounded by the infinite cold universe, the overwhelming loneliness finally breaks him. He weeps for the future that was stolen from him. Back inside, he hits rock bottom. Standing at the edge of the airlock, Jim contemplates suicide, ready to open the door and end it all. But at the very last second, he steps back. Fleeing to the hibernation bay, he wanders among the sleeping passengers until he spots a pod containing a beautiful woman named Aurora. Obsessed, he dives into her digital files. He learns she's a writer and quickly convinces himself she is the perfect woman. But reality hits hard. By the time she naturally wakes up, he will be long dead. A dark, terrible thought takes root in his mind. He wrestles with his conscience, knowing that waking her would be an act of murder, stealing her entire future just to cure his isolation. He fights the urge with everything he has, but after a brutal year of total solitude, he snaps. Jim sabotages her pod, triggers the waking sequence, and cowardly flees the scene. Later, he finds Aurora wandering the massive halls. He puts on a performance, pretending to be absolutely shocked to see her. Jim lies directly to her face, claiming her pod malfunctioned just like his, and delivers the devastating news. They still have 89 years left on the journey. He details his own failed attempts to breach the bridge and his agonizing year of loneliness. Panic sets in. Aurora sprints back to her pod, desperately trying to reverse the process, but realizes she can never go back to sleep. That night, a guilty Jim visits the bar and forces Arthur to promise he will never reveal the truth. The next morning, Aurora wakes up sobbing, searching frantically for a solution, but Jim gently assures her there isn't one. Accepting her fate, Aurora begins writing a book about her terrifying experience, being trapped in space with a total stranger for the rest of her life. She interviews Jim, asking why he left Earth. He explains his desire to build something tangible on a brand new frontier, rather than wasting away in a disposable society. As they bond, Aurora shares her own grand plan. She intended to travel to the future and return to Earth to write the greatest story ever told. Slowly, Jim shows her how to survive eternity. They kill time by dancing, watching movies, and grabbing drinks with Arthur. Gathering his courage, Jim asks her out on a formal date, and she says yes. Dressed elegantly, they share a romantic dinner and open up about their pasts. Jim even takes her on a spacewalk, letting her float right beside him against the backdrop of a billion stars. Inevitably, they fall deeply in love and move in together. A year of pure happiness passes, but on Aurora's birthday, everything shatters. While chatting at the bar, Arthur misunderstands one of Jim's comments and casually mentions that Jim chose to wake Aurora up. The betrayal hits her like a physical blow. Devastated, she flees to her room in tears. Jim chases after her, pleading to apologize, but she refuses to listen. The pain turns to blinding rage. Later that night, she storms into his room while he's sleeping. She beats him relentlessly and even raises a heavy sledgehammer to kill him, but she cannot bring herself to strike the fatal blow. Instead, she cuts him out of her life entirely. Jim tries to explain his soul-crushing isolation over the ship's intercom, but Aurora coldly tells him he murdered her. In a desperate bid for forgiveness, he plants a real tree in the Grand Concourse, but the freezing silence between them remains. Suddenly, a gruff voice echoes over the intercom, demanding to know who planted the tree. It's Gus Mancuso, a deck chief whose pod has also failed. Gus immediately escorts them to the secure crew deck. He pulls the system logs and confirms the horrifying truth. Jim deliberately tampered with Aurora's pod. But as Aurora fumes, Gus offers a grim perspective. He tells her that a drowning man will naturally drag someone down with him, urging her to at least understand Jim's maddening despair. There is no time for grudges, however, because the Avalon is falling apart. While Aurora takes a swim in the glass pool, the artificial gravity violently fails. The water rises into a massive, suffocating bubble, trapping her inside, gasping for air. Across the ship, Jim is violently thrown against his walls until the gravity violently slams back online. Gus gathers the two of them and delivers a fatal diagnosis. The ship is dying, and it will never reach its destination. They race toward engineering, but Gus suddenly collapses in agony. A scan in the medical bay reveals that his malfunctioning pod has riddled his body with over 600 terminal disorders. He is dying rapidly. With his last breaths, Gus hands Jim his command ID bracelet, granting full access to the ship, and begs them to take care of each other. With Gus gone, Jim and Aurora rush to save the ship. They find Arthur glitching wildly, tearing the bar apart, and are forced to disable him. Pushing forward, they reach the reactor room, only to discover a massive hull breach venting the atmosphere into space. Aurora is nearly pulled out into the void, but Jim grabs her just in time. They manage to replace a fried computer module, but the core reactor is critically overheating. The only way to stop a ship-wide explosion is to manually open the exterior vent from the outside. Knowing it's a suicide mission, Jim suits up and hands Aurora the command bracelet. She begs him not to go, finally realizing she cannot live without him. But Jim steps out into the abyss. He reaches the massive vent door, which requires him to physically hold it open. He screams over the comms, ordering Aurora to pull the release lever inside to save the 5,000 passengers. Crying, she pulls it. A colossal blast of nuclear fire vents into space, blowing Jim away and snapping his safety tether. Watching him drift into the darkness, Aurora risks everything. She suits up, launches herself into the void, and manages to catch his drifting body. She drags him back through the airlock and rushes him to the autodock machine. Using Gus's high-level ID, she overrides the system protocols, initiates emergency resuscitation, and miraculously brings Jim back from the dead. In the quiet aftermath, Jim holds a solemn space burial for Gus. While exploring the medical bay, Jim discovers a hidden function in the autodock. It can place one person back into hibernation. He immediately offers the chance to Aurora, but she refuses, finally choosing to spend her remaining life with him. Later, in the empty bar, Jim proposes to Aurora, and she happily accepts. 88 years later, the passengers finally wake up. They walk into the Grand Concourse only to find it transformed into a lush, thriving jungle. As they look around in awe, Aurora's recorded voiceover plays, reading from her finished book. She tells the beautiful, tragic story of the life they built together among the stars. The video concludes by inviting viewers to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, leaving them with one final, lingering question. If you were in Jim's shoes, would you wake her up to save yourself, or would you choose to die alone?